Hey, it's Amy Newmark. I'm off this week for a writing retreat because I have to work on my book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Maverick with a Mission. It's coming out in October, and I have to write it. I hope you enjoy this week's episodes. What we're doing is rerunning the very first week of the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast. Chances are you haven't heard these episodes before, and I think you'll enjoy them.
Changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. It's Wow Wednesday, and on Wow Wednesdays, I don't make you learn a lesson. I just tell you an awesome story. So what I love about this podcast is that it does allow me to share some of my favorite stories with you. My producer, Alan, told me that he wanted me to go through 10,000 Chicken Soup for the Soul stories and identify my favorite 100 to share with you. But I've gone through those 10,000 over the last couple of weeks, and I could only narrow it down to 1,000 favorites. So let's hope we do this podcast thing for a long time together so I can tell you a lot of these stories. Because the stories are about real life, they are so fascinating. And I don't know if you know it, but we get thousands of submissions for each book that only contains 101 stories. So I truly do get to pick the cream of the crop for our books. And when I read the stories and I choose them, I'm always thinking about them in terms of movies. Like, do the stories translate visually? Can I envision a movie around one of these stories? And if I can see the story playing out on a movie screen, then I know it's a good story, because truth really is stranger than fiction. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that I think is totally movie-worthy. And if you liked the miniseries The Thornbirds, or if you were like me and you read the 1977 book by Colleen McCulloch, you'll love this story. It's called A Different Calling, and it's from our book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, True Love. So you already know you're going to like it, because who doesn't enjoy a good love story, right? This story is by Sharon Graham, and Sharon tells us that when she was only 11 years old, she developed a crush on a 20-year-old guy in her church. Now, the only attention he ever gave to Sharon was a sort of pat on the head as he went by, but she would gaze at him adoringly anyway. They lived in a small town in British Columbia, so she got teased a lot for her obvious crush on this guy, because everybody in this town knew everybody. When Sharon turned 13, she got up her courage and she asked this guy, whose name was Ken, if he would sponsor her for her confirmation ceremony, and he said yes, so she was thrilled because she got to spend extra time with her crush. But of course, he still viewed her as that little kid at the church. 2 more years passed, and now she's 15 and he's 24, and she still has a crush on him, and he still views her as that little kid. And she learned that Ken was moving to France to become a monk. She was devastated. Sharon says, "The day Ken left, I took my dream and, folding it carefully, put it away in a small place in my heart and tried to forget." But she didn't forget, and she wrote to Ken, and he wrote back, and they were pen pals for years. She was in the little town of British Columbia, and he was in the Priory, which I think is the place that monks live, in France. So 13 years passed, and now she was 28, and he was 37. And he wrote that he was moving back to North America. He was going to start a priory in Oklahoma. So she was thrilled, because at least he was going to be back on the same continent as her. But it's still pretty sad for us reading the story, because Sharon had never found another guy. She was still hung up on Ken, and he was a monk. That's why I told you this is like the Thornbirds. So once he was back in North America, Ken would occasionally visit their little town, but he always kept his distance from Sharon. She still loved him, but she knew the whole situation was impossible, but she just couldn't move on. And they continued to write to each other, and occasionally they would talk on the phone. And now that they were both adults, they could talk about serious things. And She really became his good friend and his confidant. One time, for example, he had a parishioner on death row, and he was asked to be present at the execution of this guy, and he was really upset about it, and he spent a lot of time talking to Sharon about it. And this continued for another 9 years. So now Sharon was 36 and Ken was 45, and still Sharon was hung up on this guy who was a monk. And then Ken's grandmother died, and he came back to their little town for a funeral. And Sharon made a decision. She was going to confess her feelings to the monk the night after the funeral. So she got up her courage and she did it. And then she says, the dam broke. Ken confessed that he loved her too. So now we have a Thornbird situation for sure. This is bad. But I wouldn't do that to you because it's Chicken Soup for the Soul and you're supposed to enjoy the podcast. So here's what actually happened. Ken told Sharon that he had never taken his vows as a monk. By the time he was ready to do so, he had realized that he had feelings for that girl back home in British Columbia. And so his superiors in the priory wouldn't let him take his final vows as a monk. So Ken lived with the monks. He took part in their monkly life, but he was free to leave at any time. And as soon as Sharon told him how she felt, he dropped to his knee and proposed. Okay, so you can see why I love my job. I get to read stories like that. And how much fun is that? I see wow stories like that all the time. Now, the next time we get together, I'm going to wow you in a different way with a story that will make you appreciate why we as a company are so committed to promoting dog and cat adoptions from shelters. Thank you for listening today. I'm Amy Newmark. If you'd like to read some more awesome love stories from the book that I mentioned today, Chicken Soup for the Soul, True Love, go to chickensoup.com.